So first I'd like to say thank you to ISI for inviting me to speak on this panel and for sponsoring Pepperdine's free speech seminar last week. People in the audience also were able to participate in that, and we're very grateful for that. I'm thankful for the School of Public Policy for sponsoring this conference. I'll admit I initially thought that I'd be on the student panel, but I'm relieved as I watched your guys' panel yesterday, and White and Bell did such an excellent job presenting on globalization that I was just blown away. So I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to speak alongside Mark and Jay today. I have to say it is truly a blessing to be in a room full of people who care about these questions as much as I do. A couple of weeks ago for my leadership seminar, we had to choose leaders whom we admired. I picked C.S. Lewis, Joe Lonsdale, and of course Winston Churchill. As you know, in 1925, Churchill predicted that Europe leadership would succumb to an era of middle management. I argue that Churchill's prophecy has materialized in our age of specialization, where technical experts, scientists, increasingly claim authority over questions that require wisdom, not just knowledge. Churchill's prophecy is truer today than it was 100 years ago. People are highly specialized and unable to think broadly about how life is meant to be lived. The question, who do we trust, is not merely academic. It guides how we organize society. As John Taylor Gatto warns, our economy depends on producing intellectual dependents, not independent thinkers. When I applied for an education policy fellowship earlier this year, I asked my interviewers if they had heard of Gatto, a legendary New York City teacher who won Teacher of the Year 3 times and spent decades exposing what's broken in our schools. The blank stares told me everything. Even those trying to reform education don't understand what destroyed it. I contend that in an age of specialization, the scientist cannot be trusted to guide humane order, precisely because the educational system that trained him destroyed the very conditions necessary for wisdom. Drawing on Gatto's 7 lessons of school teaching and Jacques Martin's vision of integral education, I'll show you how our schools don't just fail to produce philosophers, they actively manufacture their opposite. They create specialists who excel at manipulation within narrow domains, but lack the contemplative breadth to ask whether their discoveries to improve human flourishing. While scientists operate within ratio, discursive reasoning, they lack intellectus, contemplative wisdom. Only the poet-philosopher, who cultivates both, who joins truth to meaning, can be trusted to order our common life toward the good. We cannot reawaken the giants unless we identify the reasons they left. To understand why we can't trust scientists to guide us, we need to understand what Gatto discovered in his 30 years teaching in New York City public schools. Gatto won Teacher of the Year awards, but he became famous for something else, exposing what he called the 7 lessons of school teaching, the hidden curriculum that shapes every student who passes through our system. These lessons don't just destroy education in general, they specifically destroy the conditions that produce poets, while perfectly training scientists and technocrats. Let me show you what I mean. Gatto's first lesson is confusion. He writes everything is disconnected. The orbiting of planets, the law of large numbers, slavery, adjectives, architectural drawing, dance, gymnasium, assemblies, surprise guests, fire drills, computer languages, and on and on. What do any of these things have to do with each other? Nothing according to the system. Students learn that knowledge has no coherence, no unity, no order, just isolated facts to be memorized and tested. But here's what Gatto understood. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. This fragmentation creates a modern scientist. The specialist thrives in disconnected silos. The chemist doesn't need to understand history. The economist doesn't need philosophy. The data scientist doesn't need theology. Each expert operates in his own narrow domain, manipulating variables he understands while remaining blind to larger questions of meaning and purpose. But the poet cannot function in this chaos. He wants to make sense of this disorder. Maritain argues that true education seeks the fulfillment of a man as a human person, a whole being, not a fragmented collection of skills. Gatto puts it bluntly, meaning, not disconnected facts, is what sane humans seek. The system teaches students to accept confusion as their destiny, and in doing so, it crushes the integrated vision before it can develop. This is why the scientist who emerges from the system cannot be trusted to guide humane order. He has been perfectly trained, expert in manipulation with his narrow domain, but unable to ask whether his discoveries serve human flourishing. He is ratio, discursive reasoning, the ability to calculate and measure, but he lacks intellectus, contemplative wisdom, the ability to see the whole and judge rightly. The scientist can tell you how to do things, but not whether you should. The second lesson Gatto teaches is class position, hierarchy. He writes, the variety of ways children are numbered by schools has increased dramatically, until it is hard to see the human being plainly under the weight of numbers they carry. Students are constantly ranked, sorted, measured, and compared. They learn early that their worth is quantifiable, that they are data points in a system. The school teacher's job, Gatto explains, is to make sure students envy and fear the better classes and have contempt for the dumb ones. This hierarchy becomes their reality. When kids focus on rankings, it limits their imagination and beliefs. They learn their place in the pecking order and stay there. Again, this creates a perfect scientist technocrat. The specialist excels at qualification, at reducing complex human realities to metrics and models. He sees the world through numbers because that's how he was taught to see himself. People become inputs, variables to optimize, populations to manage. Let me give you a perfect example of this mindset in action. In 2016, Alex Epstein, a philosopher and president of the Center for Industrial Progress, testified before the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Senator Barbara Boxer, representing California, immediately attacked his qualifications. I think it's interesting, she said with contempt, that we have a philosopher here talking about an issue. Epstein's response was brilliant. It's to teach you how to think more clearly. But Boxer couldn't hear him. For her, only credentialed scientists, those who speak in numbers and data, deserve to speak in a hearing on environmental questions. The philosopher who asks about human costs, about what kind of life is worth living, about whether our metrics are measuring what actually matters, is laughed out of the room. But Maritain reminds us, to say that a man is a person is to say that he is more a whole than a part. The poet sees what the numbers miss. The particular human being, irreducible to data, with a soul and dignity that can't be quantified. The scientist sees inputs to optimize. The poet sees persons to be formed. This is why, when asked to guide policy, the scientist offers efficiency, while the poet asks about human flourishing. Gatto's third lesson is indifference. The school teacher must teach students that nothing is truly important or worth doing beyond the allotted class period. Education becomes an on and off switch. No work is worth finishing, Gatto writes. Students must give undivided attention for 60 minutes, then immediately redirect to a completely different subject, forgetting what they just learned, ready to absorb something new. Years of bells will condition all but the strongest to a world that can no longer offer important work to do. Churchill saw this coming a century ago. He described an education which passes in at one ear and out at the other, universal and superficial. It produces enormous numbers of standardized citizens, all equipped with regulated opinions, prejudices, and sentiments according to their class or party. Churchill warned of the consequences. We are witnessing a great diminution in the number of independent people who had some standing of their own, albeit a small one, and who, if they conducted their affairs with reasonable prudence, could live by no man's leave underneath the law. The bell-trained student becomes the adult who believes work ends at 5 p.m., not because he's found leisure, but because he's learned nothing is worth sustained devotion. But the poet requires what Joseph Piper calls leisure, not mere rest or entertainment, but contemplative space, where the mind can dwell, wonder, and receive. The poet needs to finish things, to see things through to their ends, to sit with the truth until understanding emerges. This takes time that our system does not grant. The bell-conditioned scientist cannot be trusted to guide humane order because he lacks the patience and independence necessary for genuine wisdom. He serves whoever signs his grants, whoever approves his projects, whoever controls his career advancement. The poet-philosopher seeks to serve truth alone. Gatto's fourth and fifth lessons teach dependency, emotional and intellectual. Through stars and red checks, smiles and frowns, prizes, honors, and disgraces, the system teaches students to surrender their will to the predestined chain of command. The school teacher must guard against individuality because, as Gatto writes, individuality is a contradiction of class theory, a curse to all systems of classification. Good students, Gatto observes, wait for a teacher to tell them what to do. They learn to seek external validation for everything, their worth, their choices, their very sense of self. Rights become privileges that can be withdrawn. Freedom becomes permission granted by authority. This is the ultimate formation of the untrustworthy scientist. He has been trained from childhood to defer to institutional authorities, to please those in power, to seek consensus within his field. When capital S science, conflicts with observed reality, he trusts science. When his finding depends on reaching certain conclusions, he somehow reaches those conclusions, not from malice, but from a lifetime of conditioning to please those who evaluate him. And here's the deepest problem. Gatto explains that our economy requires this dependency. Monopoly schooling, he writes, draws its greatest power from being a natural adjunct to the kind of commercial economy we have that requires permanently dissatisfied consumers. The system needs workers who will consume, who will seek endless upgrades and purchases to fill the void where meaning should be. It needs people who can't think for themselves, who trust experts to tell them what they want and what to fear. And scientific research itself largely exists through monopolies. It is, in a truly competitive market, profits get competed away. There's no excess capital for long-term research and development. Only monopolies generate the surplus cash needed to fund labs and pay researchers. This is precisely why governments permit monopolies to exist, for the supposed virtue of R&D funding. But this means a scientist doesn't just serve grant makers, he serves monopolistic power. His research agenda is shaped by those with capital to invest, not by the pursuit of truth for its own sake. The scientist, not the technocrat, the scientist, the technocrat, the middle manager, are all products of the system. They cannot be trusted to guide us because they have never learned to trust themselves. They have ratio without intellectus, technique without wisdom, knowledge without the moral imagination to see where it should lead. Maritain gives us a cure to Gatto's poison, 5 dispositions that truly educated people must possess: love of truth, love of good and justice, openness to existence, respect to work, and a cooperative nature. But these dispositions can only develop through a certain kind of education, one radically different from what our system provides. Listen to what Maritain says. In a social order fitted to the common dignity of man, college education should be given to all, so as to complete the preparation of the youth before he enters a state of manhood. To introduce specialization in this sphere is to do violence to the world of youth. Do violence to the world of youth. That's what specialization does. The very thing our system prizes: early tracking, AP classes, career preparation from middle school onward, Maritain calls violent. And here's why. A young man will choose a specialty for himself in due time, processing all the more rapidly and perfectly in vocational, scientific, and technical training, in proportion as his education has been liberal and universal. The scientists we create, trained early in narrow specialization, never develop the breadth necessary for wisdom. But the poet, educated liberally in the full range of human knowledge, can specialize later without losing sight of the whole. Maritain writes that youth has a right to education in the liberal arts in order to be prepared for human work and for human leisure. But such education is killed by premature specialization. And this isn't just for wealthy kids or the gifted. Maritain quotes the president of St. John's College, and I want you to hear this. Since liberal education is of a sort that enables each man to think as well as his native powers permit, it is by definition appropriate to all men. It is not for the rich alone, nor the intellectual elite alone. A free society that limits it to a small fraction of the citizens does so at the peril of its existence. When we train specialists instead of educating whole persons, when we create scientists without poets to guide them, we're not just failing individual students, we're endangering our society as a whole. Because here's Maritain's key insight. At the beginning of human action, insofar as it is human, there is truth, grasped or believed to be grasped for the sake of truth. Without trust in truth, there is no human effectiveness. The scientist has been trained to pursue effectiveness, results, publications, grants, measurable impact. The poet pursues truth for its own sake, and only those who pursue truth, Maritain argues, achieve genuine human effectiveness. The scientist chasing outcomes loses both. The poet pursuing truth can guide what the specialist discovers toward authentically human ends. So where does this leave us? Churchill warned that in this age of mass effects, poets will not sing, nor sculptors chisel the deeds of conquerors. It may well be that the chemist will carry off what credit can be found. We're living in Churchill's prophecy now. The scientist receives undeserved respect while the poet gets laughed out of Senate hearings. But here's the thing, Gatto and Maritain both offer us hope, not just diagnosis. Although the outlook from Churchill and Gatto is grim, Gatto doesn't just criticize, he gives us a solution. He calls it the congregational principle. Gatto argues that we should trust children and families to know what is best for themselves. We must not look for corporate solutions, but local ones. The congregational principle involves everyone in the community, businesses, institutions, old people, and whole families. If we choose the wrong form of schooling, the negative effects are localized. The results are seen directly in the community, so reform is actually possible. And here's something Gatto points out that should give us hope. It only takes about 100 hours for someone to learn to read and become a self-teacher. I can read, I swear. We're not talking about some impossibly complex transformation. This localism creates the conditions where poets can actually emerge, where contemplation matters, where persons are seen as fools, where wisdom is valued over credentials. In communities of human scale, the true, the good, and the beautiful can matter in ways they never can with massive bureaucratic systems that reduce persons to data points. Merton argues that a liberal arts education isn't just beneficial, it's essential to democracy's survival. Students must be armed with knowledge, strength of judgment, and moral virtues. They must develop those 5 dispositions. They need to engage with great thinkers, develop theological understanding, experience authentic friendship. This is how you form people who love freedom, who can think independently, who trust truth more than experts. The poet-philosopher can guide us toward this new horizon, but only if we create the conditions where contemplation, beauty, and wisdom matter more than optimization and productivity. Gatto's congregational principle provides the method, local control, trust in families. Merton's vision of the true human person provides the goal, someone rational, free, righteous, formed in virtue, and directed toward love. We cannot reawaken the giants unless we identify the reasons they left. Gatto has shown us the system that drove them away: confusion, hierarchy, indifference, dependency. Merton has shown us in the vision that we can call them back through truth, justice, openness, commitment, cooperation. If we are to preserve humane order, we must develop individuals into freedom-loving people. There's no formula for virtue or even education. One is either getting closer to the ideal or further from it. The question isn't whether we need the poets. We do. The question is whether we'll trust them enough to let them guide us, or whether we'll continue to defer to scientists who have been trained from childhood, not to see the whole, only through foundations built on wisdom and just technical expertise can civilization